Hi guys, and thank you so much for joining me. If you are new to my channel, I'm Kat and I like to talk about true crime, conspiracies and all sorts of related things. Today I want to carry on talking about Madeleine Mccann and the Washington connection. But before we do that, just a quick disclaimer: all the information I'm giving you in today's video is already found in the public domain. I will also be sharing my own views and opinions on the case. I also don't mean any disrespect to anyone I talk about in the video. This is purely for education and entertainment purposes. Thank you so much. So let's get started. With thanks to Jill Haven Forum for the information. Madeleine Mccann goes missing on the night of 3rd of May 2007, and not even 2 months later, Jerry McCann jets to Washington DC on Monday, 23rd of July 2007. He spent nearly the whole time in discussions and meetings with Ernie Allen, the boss of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Ernie Allen resigned as the president and CEO of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2012 and from the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2014. But today, he is the boss of a new worldwide organization set up in 2016 to coordinate international child protection, the We Protect Global Alliance, WPGA. Ernie Allen is the chairman of the WPGA's advisory board and heads the organization along with its founder, Baroness Joanna Shields, OBE. Joanna Shields was previously British Minister for Internet Safety and Security and advisor on the digital economy to Prime Minister David Cameron. In 2016, she was appointed the Prime Minister's Special Representative for Internet Crime and Harms at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. WPGA is backed and funded by most of the world's major corporations and by over 100 national governments. Let's look at Jerry McCann's blog for that week. Quote, "Spent the whole day traveling from the Algarve to Washington, where I will be visiting the national and international centers for missing and exploited children and meeting politicians involved in recent legislation on missing children. The flights for our campaign manager and myself were kindly donated by an airline. There is a very upsetting story on the front page of a British national newspaper today. The headline suggests that Kate and I face prosecution for neglecting our children by dining 50 yards away and checking on them regularly. We know that there has been criticism in some quarters of our actions, but at the time we felt our actions were responsible. We were essentially performing our own baby listening service, although we have talked of the guilt we felt at not being there at the moment Madeleine was taken. We have been advised that legally our behavior was well within the bounds of responsible parenting and subsequently been assured that no action will be taken. These types of criticism, particularly at this stage, as well as being hurtful, are extremely unhelpful in the search for Madeleine. From the moment we discovered Madeleine missing, Kate and I have done everything in our power to try and help get her back. Our opinion now is completely clouded by what has happened to us and of course has sent shockwaves through thousands of families. The real issue is that we should not have a constant fear of abduction of our children from their bedrooms, gardens or streets for that matter. What Kate and I did was at worst naive, and no one should forget that the real criminal is the predator who has taken a completely innocent child in such a premeditated fashion. It is this act that has wreaked havoc on our family and affected millions of other people." End of quote. But of course, yet again, we have Jerry McCann just justifying his and Kate's actions and comparing leaving Madeleine in a hotel room in a foreign country to leaving her in the house sleeping when they are in the garden. And it's not the first time Jerry says it, is it? We know the famous words of wisdom from him that is no different from leaving your kids sleeping upstairs whilst you have a barbecue in your garden. Well, Jerry is not exactly like that though, is it? The most obvious To start with, you are in a foreign country, in an apartment, on a public street, in the corner, and a balcony, and a huge pool between the apartment and the tapas bar. It's not really rocket science, Jerry, is it? But I guess anything goes as long as the blame is on others, not on you. Yeah, my opinion. In 2007, Jim Gamble was the boss of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, the COPE. When Madeleine was reported missing on 3rd of May 2007, he immediately became involved, urging the public to send him holiday photos they may have taken during the fortnight leading up to 3rd of May. There is evidence, I'm going to put evidence in air brackets, yeah. Information, I would rather just call it information, from the Wayback Machine that he set up a dummy page titled Madeleine Mccann on the COP website on Monday 30th of April that would suggest that something serious happened to Madeleine on or before that date. He then wholeheartedly backed the McCanns, appearing with them several times on TV and at conferences, and even fronted a promotional video for them which backed their ongoing search for Madeleine. Both Ernie Allen and Jim Gamble appeared in the 8-part documentary on Madeleine McCann by Netflix in 2019, a series that simply used every device possible to provide the abduction narrative, with no alternative views allowed. There's nothing new there, is it? The Sun reported on 15th of March 2019 under the headline, "Missing Madeleine McCann is still alive," a sensational new Netflix documentary has claimed. The 8-part series suggests that people traffickers abducted the 3-year-old in Portugal in 2007 as a top child protection cop insists that the 12-year mystery will be solved. And who was the child protection top cop? Jim Gamble, of course. As the Sun reported, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann features 40 so-called experts and key figures in the case, some of whom argue she was taken to another foreign country. Jim Gamble, the top child protection cop in the UK's first Maddie investigation, says, and I quote, "I absolutely believe that in my lifetime we will find out what has happened to Madeleine McCann. There's huge hope to be had with the advances in technology. Year on year, DNA is getting better. Year on year, other techniques, including facial recognition, are getting better. And as we use that technology to revisit and review that which we captured in the past, there's every likelihood that something we already know will slip into position." End of quote. The magic words here being something we already know. So, what exactly do you know, Jim Gamble? And also, we also know that the McCanns are not very happy to allow modern technologies to, take analysis and DNA and whatever. We already know the case of the famous doctor who they refused. And he even offered his services for free and they still refuse. So, that's a bit, I don't believe it. Actually, Gamble wasn't officially involved in the first investigation, but he did play a very significant role in the McCann's campaign. Netflix also brought in the Washington-based Ernie Allen into their lengthy documentary. The Sun said, and I quote again, "There was also fresh optimism from child abduction experts, including Ernie Allen, head of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the US." End of quote. But please keep in mind, Gamble resigned from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children 7 years before the Netflix show. So why was Ernie Allen still referred as the head of the National Center for Missing Children in the documentary? Was it to give the story more credibility? You know how people are like, well, the expert is saying this, so it must be true, right? Because that's exactly how gullible some of us can be, and these people know that, and they are playing us. There is an interesting connection between the National Center for Missing Children and the media obsession with the latest suspect abductor in the Madeleine McCann case, Christian Bruckner. In 2013, a 1-hour TV documentary BBC Crime Watch McCann special was screened, attracting a huge audience of 7.1 million people. It featured two highly questionable efforts of questionable origin, supposedly drawn up by Irishman Martin Smith. Many believe the efforts looked like Jerry McCann. A similar program, also featuring the two efforts, was shown in Germany. The public has been told that a number of people phoned in and said that they resembled Christian Bruckner. We know that the National Center for Missing Children supplied information about Bruckner to the current German police investigation carried out by the BKG, Germany's top criminal intelligence unit, as to whether Bruckner could have abducted or murdered Madeleine, a ridiculous claim to anyone who is familiar with the main line of evidence in this case. So, let's think about this, but not before I have a sip of my coffee. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is and has been the main source of intelligence to the BKG, the Germany's intelligence service, about the online activity of pedophiles, including in the case of Bruckner. The Center for Missing Children, for obvious reasons, has close contact with the main big tech internet companies such as Facebook, Google and Microsoft, who constantly scan their data using state-of-the-art filtering technologies for images of child sexual abuse. The detected files are directly transmitted to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Only in 2020 alone, Facebook reported more than 20 million child sexual abuse images, more than any other company did, and this is across Facebook and Instagram. It made 35 times more reports than Google, for example. Facebook's platforms contain the vast majority of all child sexual content flagged to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which represent a 31% increase on the 60 million images reported to them by the platform in 2019. The Sun gave further information about Jerry McCann's series of meetings with Ernie Allen. Allen helped the McCanns in their search by creating an age-progressed image of Maddie, who would now be 15 years old, and tells how he has assisted in returning many other abducted youngsters to their families in similar circumstances. In the documentary, Ernie says there are many cases we can point to in which children have been found, have come home alive after months, after years. There have been cases in the United States in which witnesses, people who have information, haven't come forward for decades and then one day provide information that helps lead to the resolution of this case. How could these two heads of some of the world's largest child protection agencies rush to support the McCanns? And still doing it years later, despite evidence of cadavers sent almost certainly belonging to Madeleine found in the McCanns' holiday apartment and on their clothing. Producer of the Netflix series, Emma Leach, made an interesting comment to The Sun, quote, "Keeping any search for what happened to Madeleine in the consciousness, particularly globally, is something that's so important," end of quote. Of course that's very important, because people should never forget that Madeleine McCann was abducted and could only have been abducted, right? This is the story that needs to stay in our consciousness, right? Okay, another significant Washington connection in this case, the decision by Brian Kennedy, the McCanns, and the Find Madeleine Fund to award a $1 million, the equivalent of £750,000, 6-month contract to Washington-based Kevin Halligan, to search for Madeleine. So, how did Halligan, who was a British resident, end up in Washington? After being involved in a number of companies close to the defense and security industries, Halligan, on 17th of March 2005, founded, together with Tim Craig Harvey, a company called Red Defense International Limited. Craig Harvey and Halligan had founded companies before. On this occasion, Craig Harvey acted as the company secretary. Somehow, Halligan was able to persuade the Dutch-owned company Trafigura to award him and his company a fee of $12 million, 9 million pounds, to mount a rescue operation for 2 of its directors, who were being held by the government of Ivory Coast after one of its tankers dumped a load of toxic waste on its coast. And let's not forget that Clarence Mitchell was also involved with Trafigura in the sense that he was a spokesperson for them, if I remember well from my previous videos. Many people died or became seriously ill as a result of inhaling the dangerous cocktail of illegally dumped chemicals. The 2 directors were eventually freed by diplomatic means. Halligan's Red Defense Limited had nothing to do with the man's release, but by then Halligan had apparently been paid the sum of $12 million for whatever undercover operations he had been mounting in Ivory Coast. By the way, the British lawyers who acted for Trafigura were Carter Ruck, the same lawyers acting for, you guessed who, the McCanns, plus we also have Clarence Mitchell. No comment here, it's so obvious. Even though we don't know the exact timeline, and we do not know if Halligan maintained previously a home in Washington, D.C., by early 2007 he set up a base and a home there, buying his new Virginia home for around $1.75 million, 1.3 million pounds. Those who worked with Halligan on the Madeleine Mccann investigation confirmed that during 2007 he bought himself a lavish office suite in downtown Washington. He also bought a mansion in nearby Virginia which cost him $1.75 million and spent more money decorating it, began living a luxurious lifestyle or eating out in posh, expensive restaurants, went through a lavish, expensive but fake marriage ceremony and wedding celebration with Maria Dybzak, allegedly had an affair with the glamorous Dr. Shirin Trachiotis, wife of Dr. Gregory Trachiotis, both still practice in Washington to this day. In November 2007, Colonel Ken Irish III, an American, founded a company called Oakley Strategic Services. Kevin Halligan later became a director of that company in 2008. The company was one of several national security specialists to contribute to a workshop entitled Sharia Law and Financial Jihad, How Should America Respond? It was co-sponsored by the McCormick Foundation and the Center for Security Policy. Nicholas Abramo, Director of Operations, and Ken Irish, registered owner, attended. One aspect of the company's work was to assess the risks and dangers posed by Sharia-compliant finance and the indirect impact the phenomenon might have on human rights. Between December 2007 and February 2008, a company called Oakley International Group was also being formed. It was formally registered on 12th of February 2008, around a month before the very same company was employed by Brian Kennedy, the McCanns, and the Find Madeleine Fund to search for Madeleine. Very convenient and just at the right time. What are the odds? And why would you employ a newly formed company? What are the odds again? All the founders of the company lived and worked around Washington. They were, let's do it, Andre Hollis, then Vice President of Van Sycoyoc, and a regular Fox News commentator who became its Chief Executive Officer. Then Tim Unruh, a lawyer from top legal firm Peyton Boggs. Then Colonel John Garrett, another lawyer from Peyton Boggs. Kevin Halligan was also a co-founder. It was set up as a foreign limited liability company, alleged trading in defense and aeronautical search and navigation systems and equipment. Relations between Brian Kennedy, the McCann team, and Kevin Halligan broke down, and Halligan was sacked, having pocketed an alleged sum of £537,000, presumably paid in dollars as per the contract. It's possible that at this time he fled Washington, Halligan, allegedly flying to Italy with Shirin Trachiotis and then returning to live in England, where he was tracked down to the Bank Hotel, Oxford, in November 2009. Apparently, he sold his Virginia house in the autumn of 2008 for a sum of around $1.5 million, 1.50 million pounds. His connections with Washington, D.C. and the US probably ceased at this point. Between February and the end of March 2008, Oakley International Group were awarded a 6-month contract by Brian Kennedy and the McCanns for a fee of $1 million, 750,000 pounds, like I just mentioned. The main question is, though, why did the multimillionaire businessman Brian Kennedy from Cheshire, England, appoint this Washington-based company specializing in navigation technology to hunt for a British girl who was reported missing in Portugal? Some other developments in Washington at this time were very strange. In March 2008, the Forensic Science Services in Birmingham were preparing a final report on the forensics for the McCann investigation. In this very same month, Halligan's business partner, Andre Hollis, and his company, Van Scoyoc, began lobbying the US Senate on behalf of the FSS, the Forensic Services from Birmingham. One of the senators they met was Richard C. Shelby, whom Jerry McCann met in Washington 8 months before whilst visiting Ernie Allen. So, a very strange direct connection here. Richard C. Shelby between Jerry McCann's visit to Washington in July 2007 and later Brian Kennedy's decision in March 2008 on behalf of the McCanns to appoint Kevin Halligan and Oakley International to run the Madeleine Mccann investigation. I don't see any rational explanation for this whatsoever. Do you? Shelby has been a US Senator continuously since 1986. In 1994, he was a Democrat, but that year, when a red Republican wave swept America and Congress went Republican, Shelby was smart enough to change horses midstream and morphed into a member of the Republican Party, where he remains to this day. He now chairs the prestigious Senate Appropriation Finance Committee. Shelby's election campaign in 2008 was supported by Kinetic North America, a defense contractor and legal firm, Peyton Boggs. They contributed large donations to his election campaign. Shelby returned the favor, as you do of course, by awarding Kinetic North America a contract worth $8 million for work on behalf of the US Army Aviation and Missile Research Development and Engineering Center. Yeah, I can see how this went actually. You know, Kinetic probably said to Shelby, come on, we'll support you financially if we just get that contract. And you know the end of the story, I just said it. In April 2008, Halligan's partner, Andre Hollis, lobbied the House of Representatives and the US Senate on behalf of Oakley Strategic Services in a bid to win contracts with the US. In April 2008, Andre Hollis suddenly left Van Scoyoc and became head of due diligence at Tiger International. For some reason, I keep pronouncing this wrong. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so each time when I'm going to say that company's name, Van Scoyoc, I'm just gonna put it on your screen as well. At around the same time, Kinetic's managing director Simon Bennett took over the FSS, which is the forensic lab in Birmingham, at this time to prepare it for privatization. There you go. And now I think that this is precisely why the tests performed at the Birmingham lab were inconclusive. Initial report says something different than the final report. A negotiation happened in the middle of this. The article by Mark Hollingsworth in the Evening Standard in August 2009, which revealed the huge sums of money paid by the Find Madeleine Fund to Kevin Halligan and portrayed him as a conman, described Halligan as operating from a wine bar in Jermyn Street, London, surrounded by a battery of mobile phones and drinking heavily. However, that's not the full picture. For much of the time, from March to August, he was employed by the McCanns. He was he was still very much based in Washington. It was in August 2008 that news broke in Britain of how Halligan had been sacked from the Madeleine Mccann investigation, and it seems that just days later he fled Washington and headed for Rome. Sometime later he returned to England, where he was eventually arrested on 26th of November 2009. Another connection to Washington is the appointment of the Virginia-based company iJet to run the McCann's so-called investigation hotline. People were meant to phone the hotline or send in emails if they felt they had valuable information about Madeleine's disappearance. This story was covered by Daniel Boffey in the Mail on Sunday in August 2010. Quote, Madeleine McCann investigator didn't listen to any tip-offs given to hotline and squandered £500,000. By Daniel Boffey in Washington, updated 12/06, 29th of August 2010. A private eye whose company was paid £500,000 from a public fund to find Madeleine McCann squandered the money on a series of bizarre schemes that had no chance of locating the missing child. Kevin Halligan, who claimed to have experience in the British Secret Services, was arrested last week in an Oxford hotel after an FBI manhunt over an unrelated £1.3 million fraud case in America. His investigations company, Oakley International, was taken on in March last year by the Find Madeleine Fund and her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann. But the Mail on Sunday can reveal today that despite setting up a hotline for potential informants and witnesses, none of the hundreds of calls received by a call center hired by Halligan, 48, was listened to by Oakley investigators. Halligan and Oakley International, based in Washington, failed to listen to a single call received on the hotline set up for potential informants by Kate and Jerry McCann last year. Joan Seal, the director of operations at iJet, the US firm that managed the Find Madeleine phone line, revealed that for a year nobody even asked his company if they could listen to any of the calls received. Mr. Seal said his operators in Annapolis, Virginia had answered hundreds of calls, but the information seemed wasted, possibly squandering valuable leads. He said, we delivered Oakley a report with a summary of the calls and said if they wanted to come back, they could listen to the recording, but nobody did. We are not sure whether Halligan provided our report to the family or to the trust or to those working with them or to the teams working after him, because no one came back to us. We sent the report to Oakley Group and our assumption was that they were using it as a piece in the puzzle. But it appears that wasn't the case. Two of Halligan's former colleagues in the investigation, John Taylor and Dr. Richard Parton, said they became concerned early on in their working relationship with the self-styled super spy. Dr. Parton, whose company Intel was employed for its alleged expertise on interview techniques, said he and his partner had been encouraged by Halligan to get involved with a high-profile case. Dr. Parton said, I repeatedly told Halligan that his investigators on the ground in Portugal were not doing a proper job. But he insisted lots of things were going on I didn't know about. It was all such a waste of money and time. However, it was only later, when tape recordings of interviews undertaken in Praia da Luz were sent to Dr. Parton and Mr. Taylor in Washington, that they started to fear the worst for the investigation. They also contacted Maria Dybzak, a trade lawyer for the US Commerce Department, whom they understood to be Halligan's wife. It emerged she had agreed to go along with a fake wedding service to keep up appearances for Halligan. Dr. Parton said she admitted she wasn't proud of it, but she had been tricked too. He claimed that the job he was doing with the CIA meant that he couldn't have his name on a marriage certificate. End of quote. Dr. Parton and John Taylor were recruited by Halligan in Washington. Both Parton and Taylor lived in Washington. Their company, first named VLLC and later Intel, has no checkable history apart from Parton's Intel website and some earlier presentations of his bogus voice analysis techniques between 2003 and 2005. Those who attended his presentations described them as no better than tea leaf reading. The following people, all living and working in or around Washington: Ernie Allen, chairman of We Protect Global Alliance; Senator Richard C. Shelby; Kevin Halligan; Dr. Richard Parton; John Taylor, top legal firm Peyton Boggs; Andre Hollis, Oakley Investigations Group, and iJet director Joanne Seal were all connected in a significant way with the Madeleine McCann case. You already know my views on this case, of course, if you've been watching my Madeleine McCann series, but I can't help myself but ask, why would parents from the UK of a missing child in Portugal were working with PIs or, you know, investigators or whatever from the US? It just doesn't make any sense. I would assume you would look for someone from the UK but not from the US. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's just mind-blowing. What do you guys think? Anyway, we are at the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to hit the like button, hit the thumbs up button or the thumbs down button. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps my channel and it helps me to keep going, because the more engagement on a video, the more YouTube will share it on the platform. Thank you again so much, guys. Stay safe and take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.